Congressman Blunt Rochester, we have talked about so many issues, but I think this is the first on the supply chain crisis. I think if we were together a few years ago, no one would have showed up, even if we had had avocado toast, right? So, and I want to point out, Christy Rogers, my friend Christy Rogers from Principal to Principal here, she had a huge forum yesterday on supply chain crisis. My friend Jeff Carneal with Project 44. Many of you are engaged in the supply chain questions right now because, and I'm just to ask you, why has this topic become so compelling and important, sort of one of the top issues that you're focused on?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's really weird, as you said, that like supply chain is now like a buzzword. Like everybody knows this now that might not have known it before.
If you had run on supply chain, you wouldn't have gotten anywhere, right? Yeah.
But guess what? Yeah. I ran on supply chains this election, and people actually, it resonated with people. And I think one of the things that we tried to do was make it really practical in real life and help people understand why are the cost of things going up? Why is it taking so long to get things? And so for me, I'm on the health subcommittee in addition to energy and environment and climate change. And on the health subcommittee, from the beginning of the pandemic, we saw you couldn't get masks. People were wearing trash bags for PPE. Then I went out to visit my business community, different businesses, and they were talking about the price of lumber and how it was hard to get it. And then that increased the cost of housing. And then we actually went to a car dealership. There were no cars because there were no chips. We went to a distillery that made vodka and gin. They didn't have bottles or labels. They had to reconfigure everything that they did. And so what we found... Baby formula. I mean,
what happened there?
Chicken nuggets in the schools. Yeah. I mean, you can't not have chicken nuggets like in a school. And so we just started seeing this connection and also saw an opportunity for us as a country to think about our competitiveness, our national security, our future. I started a bipartisan future work caucus in Congress because, again, we've got to do these things together. It's really important for us. And so this really resonated with my constituents. And for me, it was both practical and personal. Even going to a coffee shop, there was a sign that said, we have no pastries because of supply chain issues. I'm like, supply chain. And so, again, that's not the reason why I got into it for pastries, but it really did affect every single industry that we were dealing with.
So you're the author of the Building Resilient Supply Chains Act, which was one of the acts that was kind of trying to nudge in to the NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act. And I don't know who the villain was who kept it from getting there. So if you want to disclose why it didn't go, but why? So tell us about the act, but why would anyone block a kind of, tell us what you're trying to do and who is opposed to bringing that element into the NDAA?
Well, first of all, we were able to get on the conference committee for America. We got it into America Competes in the House, and the Senate and the House have been working on the different provisions. And we were successful in getting the CHIPS and Science Bill passed. And I don't want us to forget the things that we did accomplish because they were major. And we have caucus meetings, which actually one starts at 9 o'clock. Yeah. And I typically don't speak up in those caucus meetings because literally people are texting and live tweeting what's happening in the room. Right. But I was so compelled to stand up and tell my colleagues we have to focus on supply chains and also on our competitiveness that I made the pledge and the point in one of our meetings. And we were able to get on that conference committee. We were able to get some things done. And just so you'll know what the bill does, it creates, first of all, a central office in the Department of Commerce that will be responsible for looking at everything from our gaps, our breaks, fixing our supply chains and making sure that we're mapping and monitoring them, and also providing loans and grants to make sure that we onshore and nearshore businesses home in America. And so this bill had bipartisan support in the House and the Senate. As it relates to the most recent NDAA, I think it was a victim as many other things that people wanted to attach onto that vehicle. There had to be agreement that we could get this NDAA passed. But what I am confident and hopeful about is the fact that the conversations haven't stopped. Right. The fact that you're even having a session on this is proof that we recognize whether it's food, whether it's, logistics,
But
all of this is important.
yesterday I happened
Now,
to.
you might know who killed it. I mean, maybe that's why you asked
No,
me.
no, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I ask questions I don't know the answers to occasionally. Sometimes I do. But yesterday I interviewed Kathy McMorris Rogers, who's going to be the incoming chair for the Energy and Commerce Committee. And she made a really interesting point, because I was sort of thinking in advance of the supply chain crisis, what are the missing blind spots in the conversation? And I asked her, and she said, for her, she opposed the CHIPS Act, not because she doesn't think we should be investing in chips, because he said there are other parts of the ecosystem that we're not thinking through. For her, it's the fact that we've got a lot of money now in the CHIPS Act, but we haven't solved the permitting problem. We're not going to be able to build these places within the time. So permitting within that was one element of it. Another part are things like the supply chain ecosystem. And she says we're not taking a holistic view. Right. Would you agree with her on that?
I would agree with her. That's why the conference committee came together. And it was a very comprehensive approach that we were trying to take. But we also had, I would say, urgent needs.
Right.
Chips are an urgent need. I mean, I visited a company in Delaware that make the mammogram machines. They showed me the board that requires multiple chips and what they had to do while they didn't have those chips. It's our health, it's our wealth, it's our national security. And so that was important for that moment. But I'm glad to hear that she, like I do, feel this conversation has to continue. And she will be the chairperson of our committee, Energy and Commerce. And we had a large part to play in this.
One of the other elements is this, the missing worker in America, right? So let's be honest. I mean, there's something that has happened that, from the period of pre-COVID to now, in terms of labor shortages, in terms of a massive labor need in America to fill this gap. And we've seen it in the issues about the railways and managing them and the potential strike, which seems to have been averted, I think. But on that side, what is the thinking among your colleagues? Because part of it is rationality in logistics systems, and there are lots of people here. But at one level, are we just going to have to automate and get rid of people, or is there a people way to do it if you don't have the folks to man the ships and the planes and the systems?
I mean, I think that's a great question. I mean, first of all, I remember a couple of months ago, I was in the elevator in the Longworth office building in the Capitol, and I heard one of the interns say, my major is logistics. And I was like, we never thought to have that as a major. But now, again, supply chains, logistics, these are new things. And even in Delaware, we have a program called Pathways to Prosperity, which starts in middle school, goes to high school, and kids can then go to college or go right to a job.
Right. And
they just created a pathway just for logistics. And so I think one is looking at our workforce and how we do things. I was Secretary of Labor in Delaware and head of state personnel. And I think that we need to take this moment to not do things the way we always did them and to be thinking creatively. People left the workforce because of COVID, but many women didn't come back. We have a childcare problem in this country. We have a training issue in this country. We have a flexibility and thinking about how people want to live their lives now. Many people retired, and some people just said, I don't want to do that kind of work anymore. And so for me, that's why I focused on the future of work before we even had the pandemic, because we saw automation coming. And I think instead of going backwards, we need to lean forward.
You voted to avert the rail strike. Was that a tough vote?
For me, you're weighing different things. And I'm a strong believer in labor. I mean, even on our bill for the supply chain bill, I had roundtables with labor so that we had the chamber, we had the business roundtable, but we also had labor at the table. So I'm a strong believer in labor. But I also know that for the greater good of our country, we could not have that rail strike. And we did partner and have conversations. And I think the president, I think the administration, and I think we in Congress did the right thing at this time.
I'm going to ask you one more quick one, and then I'm going to go to the audience group. We're moving very quickly here, so Christy, get ready, because I promised you the first question. So we've also seen that food prices have been going up. It's supply demand, and if you don't have the supply, it's going to go up. And yesterday we had 7.1% inflation. People applauded that in a way, and the markets applauded that. do you think that supply and demand are beginning to come back into gear, or is this going to be a longer term problem that Americans are going to still see the price of food products, the price of baby formula, the price of toilet paper, all of this stuff continue to rise because of the shortages that still remain out there?
I mean, I think,
and logistics issues too.
yeah, I don't think it's going to be solved tomorrow. I think that the numbers gave us hope. But I do think that it's so complicated when you think about everything from a war in Ukraine and what impact that has on things like food. When you think about the fact that the good news is that we have jobs and that wages are going up, but that also means that the price of goods can go up. And so I don't think it's going to be a short-term fix. But I do think that us focusing on things like supply chains and making sure that we as a country...
Are you going to bring the Building Resilient Supply Chains Act back in the next Congress?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So very early. We'll expect to see it very early.
Very, very early.
It's drafted, done, get it in.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Chris,
So that might be a nice applause line right there. We're bringing it back.
Yeah. Okay, great.
We're bringing it back.
Let's go to Christy Rogers, who's also working with principals. Christy? Yeah.
You got it? Okay.
Quick, yeah.
Well, good morning. Thank you. And thank you so very much for all the work and the focus that you're doing on this. We've been running a global supply chain task force since March of 2020, so the beginning of the pandemic. And honestly, we started with Chairman Peters in the Senate and Ranking Member Portman calling us up saying, how the heck can we get more masks? What can we do for pharmaceuticals? And how can we help streamline some of these supply chains? So we focused on that first and then moved to semiconductors and are now on critical minerals, rare earths, and met with a big forum, as Steve said yesterday, with Department of Energy, Commerce, and the White House, as well as Canada and Mexico and a few in South America.
So why didn't you just fix it yesterday?
So it's very complicated. We've spent 3 decades, collectively pushing our manufacturing overseas.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, uncertainty in the tax code, high regulation, and cheaper labor.
Right.
Yes.
It's going to take us a while to fix it. So my question for you, now I would love to talk to you about building resiliency supply chains back.
Right.
Is there a missing component, and how can we help you in the office at Commerce to actually really monitor the supply chains, identify the vulnerabilities, particularly in our critical goods? What can we do and what can industry do to help you sort of move that forward?
I love that question. First of all, in the language, we specifically mention monitoring and mapping. And what I would encourage you to do is keep the pressure on. I will tell you, the reason I believe that the CHIPS and Science Bill got done was not necessarily because of what we were saying and doing in Congress, but what you were doing. And I really hope that people will keep the pressure on. That's one of the reasons that I was glad to be invited here and to see that it's standing room only, because it cuts across demographic, it cuts across the country. It's affecting all of us. So please keep the pressure on. Speak to legislators, speak to Democrats and Republicans, and leadership. I'm grateful that Kathy is one of the people who's also a believer in this, but keep the pressure on. That's my advice.
Ladies and gentlemen, Lisa Blunt Rochester from Delaware. Thank you very, very much. Great to see you. Happy holidays.